Jonestown, Guyana, November 18th, 1978. In the middle of the jungle, silence reigns over 918 lifeless bodies. Men, women, children, entire families. What was promised as salvation had turned into a graveyard. At the center of this nightmare stood one man, Jim Jones, a preacher who claimed to be the voice of God, a savior for the poor and oppressed, but who led his followers to the largest mass suicide in modern history. This is the story of Jonestown, the rise of a man who promised heaven and delivered hell. Act 1. The Rise of Jim Jones. James Warren Jones was born in 1931 in the small town of Crete, Indiana. His childhood was marked by loneliness and a fascination with death. Neighbors would later recall that young Jim held funerals for animals, staging ceremonies as if he were already a preacher. By the 1950s, Jones had become exactly that, a preacher. But he was different. In a time when America was still deeply segregated, he spoke of racial equality, of justice, of unity, and people listened. He founded the People's Temple in 1955. What started as a small church quickly grew into a movement. Jones opened soup kitchens, provided shelter for the homeless, and adopted children of different races. To many, he embodied compassion. But behind the sermons was a man hungry for control. He demanded loyalty, not just to God, but to himself. He began experimenting with manipulation, encouraging followers to confess their secrets, then using those confessions against them. By the 1960s, the People's Temple had thousands of members. Jones had built not just a congregation, but a following. And in their eyes, he wasn't just a pastor, he was a savior. Act 2. The shift toward control. The 1970s brought greater power to Jim Jones, but also greater paranoia. He moved his congregation to California, where the temple gained political influence. Jones courted politicians, celebrities, and journalists. He was admired as a progressive leader, a man of the people. But inside the temple, life was different. Followers worked long hours, gave up their money, and were constantly watched. Jones preached not only about God, but about socialism, revolution, and loyalty to him alone. He began to stage loyalty tests. Members were asked to drink red liquid, told it was poison. When no one died, Jones laughed, calling it a test of faith. But for his followers, the message was clear. Their lives were no longer their own. As investigations mounted, Jones's paranoia grew. He claimed the U.S. government wanted to destroy him and his church, and so he sought a new home. In 1974, deep in the jungles of Guyana, South America, construction began on what he called a socialist utopia, Jonestown. Act 3. Jonestown and the Final Days. By 1977, over 1,000 members of the People's Temple had relocated to Jonestown. For some, it was paradise. Lush jungle, communal living, freedom from racism and poverty. But the reality was far darker. Armed guards patrolled the compound. Letters and passports were confiscated. Food was scarce and medical care limited. Jones's paranoia only intensified. He ranted over loudspeakers day and night, warning of enemies, conspiracies, and betrayal. Drugs dulled his mind, but his grip on his followers remained ironclad. By November 1978, relatives in the U.S. had grown desperate. They reported abuse, imprisonment, and brainwashing. Congressman Leo Ryan decided to investigate. Ryan arrived in Jonestown with journalists and concerned family members. At first, things seemed calm. Jones smiled, residents sang songs, and the compound appeared peaceful. But cracks quickly showed. Several members secretly passed notes begging for help to escape. When Ryan prepared to leave, violence erupted. His delegation was ambushed on an airstrip. Congressman Leo Ryan, 3 journalists, and 1 defector were murdered. Back in Jonestown, Jim Jones gathered his people. He told them the end had come, that enemies would destroy them, and that the only escape was what he called a revolutionary act. Cyanide was mixed with fruit punch. Parents gave it to their children first. Then they drank it themselves. Screams and cries filled the air, then silence. In total, 918 people died that night. It was not salvation. It was slaughter. Conclusion: Jonestown remains one of the darkest tragedies of the 20th century, not because it happened in secret, but because it happened in plain sight. Jim Jones was once hailed as a visionary, a man of compassion. But charisma, when mixed with power and paranoia, became deadly. Today, Jonestown is a warning, a reminder of how blind faith can destroy, how good intentions can be twisted into horror, and how a single man's hunger for control can end in catastrophe. As the jungle reclaimed the land where hundreds lay, the world was left to ask, how could this happen? And could it happen again? This is Jonestown. This is the mind of a killer. In the aftermath of Jonestown, the world was left in shock. The tragedy forced governments to rethink how they dealt with cults and charismatic leaders. Survivors carried trauma for the rest of their lives, while families who lost loved ones were left with grief and questions that would never be answered. Jonestown was not only a story of death, but a warning, a reminder of how hope can be twisted into control and faith into destruction. This was Jonestown, but the shadows of history hold many more stories. Stories of cults, killers, and the darkest corners of the human mind. Welcome to Mind of the Killer. Subscribe and step deeper into the shadows.